kama raisa.
Orovalete tuatua
Kerezo wazo wa.
Orovalete tuatua
Kere raisi yoni ya kama sole.
Orovalete
tuatua.
Orovalete
Wazo wa.
Orovalete tuatua
Mzansi, rise! I rise! I rise! We rise! We rise! Although many people believe politics is a game of promises, smokes, and mirrors, to us here in this room, this is no game. This is a life and death situation that we are in. There is one choice in this election. One question. Are we going to let the ANC continue ruining our lives and the future of our children?
Welcome to Unfiltered. As South Africa inches closer to its 7th poll since 1994, voters are spoiled for choice with a record number of 356 political parties on the 2024 voters' roll. These include 30 newly registered political parties. And of course, among them is the new kid on the block, Rise Mzansi, which launched its manifesto just 3 days ago. Good evening, welcome to Unfiltered. I'm Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, your host. Each of the political parties contesting for power has not run short of promises and carrots to dangle before the eyes of voters. What with South Africa's ever-expanding list of needs, challenges from crime to poverty, corruption, power outages, and many other social issues, tonight we ask Rise Mzansi's national leader Songezo Zibi on the new party's promises to change South Africa's fortunes for the better. Our question tonight is, can Rise Mzansi change South Africa's political fortunes? And remember, you can join us on X using our handle @Unfiltered SABC. Mr. Zibi, thank you so much for joining us on Unfiltered.
Sizwe, thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure to have you. President Ramaphosa addressed the ANC's January 8th statement to a rather full stadium in Mpumalanga, ANC heartland.
Yes.
You also had a very impressive opening launch. The ANC may be facing challenges, but it's a really tough incumbent to dislodge. It's got a wide network, a sophisticated infrastructure. What happens when the ANC machine gets going and South Africans forget about their problems? We go into that election moment. Do you think that the ANC is already beginning to show that it has the electoral power to edge over the line in this election?
Look, the ANC is the Coca-Cola of South African politics. You know, wherever you go, you see an ANC T-shirt somewhere or somebody connected to the ANC. That's an advantage to it, but also a curse in the sense that people measure their fortunes according to how happy or unhappy they are with how the ANC has performed in government. So that can be an advantage to an organization like us. But the ANC has a formidable electoral machinery, which they are able to switch on, because them being everywhere, literally to places that we can't even begin to think of getting to, gives them that edge over literally everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, by the way, thank you for coming back onto Unfiltered. As I mentioned, you and Fikile Mbalula are two of the leaders who've been here twice, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
A lot has happened since we last spoke. I think we spoke just after you had launched, and many different new political parties had emerged. But a lot has happened since we spoke. One of the things that has happened is the launch of former President Jacob Zuma's party, or the party that he's endorsing.
Yes.
I wonder what you make of that development and what you think it will mean for the election.
Look, I think it's an important development in the context of ANC politics. I mean, we try and not spend too much time, on other parties' political issues, but it's an ANC faction outside of the ANC. And I think that's going to have a significant impact on the ANC itself. Sure. But I think it also has the effect of beginning to crystallize who stands for what amongst the electorate. And I think this election, particularly in KZN, will be much more interesting and challenging for that reason.
What do you think the challenge is, and why do you think KZN will be particularly interesting?
Because he's from there. It is where his base is. It is where he launched. It is where, at least from a distance, anecdotal, you see that's where the biggest support has been so far.
Yeah.
And I think KZN was already headed for a potential coalition government at provincial level. I think that's a near certainty now that there will be a coalition government. The question is, what combination of political parties will make up that governing coalition in KZN?
Absolutely. The question of coalitions is fascinating. Also, of course, your policies, which we're going to delve into. We've got a full hour ahead of us this evening, and a lot of interesting policy proposals coming through from Rise Mzansi. But again, just as we set the context and the backdrop of things that have happened since our last conversation, of course, we've seen more new parties emerging onto the scene since your emergence. Roger Jardine and his Change Starts Now. I wonder what you make of that, because in some ways it seems as though that could be an attempt to cannibalize a segment of the electorate that Rise Mzansi had already worked within. What do you make of the rise of Mr. Jardine's
I don't pun intended.
the rise of Change Starts Now?
Yes.
And are you worried that kind of new party in your ballpark muddies the message and really fragments further that key segment of the electorate in which you seem to be playing?
Look, I'm not particularly worried. There is a great similarity of messaging between us, but it's also incredibly hard to convince voters to support an organization. I've really just found out, and I am finding out as we speak. It takes a long time to get to a point where you get the momentum already. So at least in terms of the areas where we are active, we've got organizers, we've got volunteers, we are confident in our own ability to continue building that momentum. I do think, though, that at election time, if all of these parties, or maybe a party like that appears to have the same messaging as ours, voters may have to think very carefully about who they vote for, because ultimately it's about trust.
Yeah, I noticed with the launch of Change Starts Now, he specifically said 2024 is not 1994, it's a different moment.
Yeah, look, 2024 is a 1994 has been kind of taken over by a lot of political parties, right? And I think maybe that might have been, I think there was a context to him saying that, but I think there's general agreement that this is a really pivotal election for all of us. We have to make very carefully considered political choices. Otherwise, we may not be able to come back from wherever we go over the next 5 years if the choices are not the right choices.
By the way, what do you make of the 2024 as our 1994 slogan being, let's say, used widely in many different political parties? It's almost transcended politics and become something outside of the election. Do you worry that that's now not quite been your message, or it's been appropriated by other parties, or is that a sign that actually your messaging and that slogan resonates deeply?
It's a bad and a good thing. Let me start with the good. I think the more people recognize the importance of this moment politically in South Africa, the better for all of us. And I think people don't have to vote for one political party. We've done that for 30 years, and it hasn't taken us to a good place. So it's good in that sense. Where we're concerned, because we deliberately set out to use that slogan, its meaning may be lost, right? And that's not a good thing. It would have been preferable for us that it's clearly identified with what we do, because we've built a lot of our organizing message on the ground around that message, which is also linked to our name as Rise Mzansi itself. So the two, from the onset, went together.
Why do you think this election is so important? There are some who say, well, every time an election comes around, it feels really important. I remember the last election felt really important. At the same time, there does seem to be this atmosphere in the country that we are entering a potential turning point.
Yeah.
What's at stake as we go to the polls this year?
So, since I think the biggest problem that I see is, well, two in particular. One, people might lose faith in the entire democratic project as a whole, because the biggest problem that we encounter in communities is that people have just lost faith in democracy, in politics and in political parties. When you are set up as a country as a democracy, and a participatory democracy, it's not a good thing. It opens up all sorts of dangerous possibilities, including the illegitimacy of government itself and parliament. So that's the one thing. The second thing is that the country is not in a good place economically and socially. People really are dying of hunger. They go without food for days, and people have lost patience, and the state has very little money. This combination of really basic need like food and the state running out of money means if we don't make the right choices now, there might be July 2021 on a larger scale.
And just before we go to a break, and we'll come back and look at the manifesto in more depth, one last political scene setter is the multi-party charter. I believe tomorrow they're coming out with a so-called consensus position on the economy and jobs. You've kept your powder dry, as it were, without going into a formal agreement with them.
Yeah.
Why not? And why don't you think a united opposition bloc at this point is the right way to go? And why would you prefer to maintain independence at this point?
So we had an internal process of building up to a manifesto. And we remained faithful to the process of speaking to people and producing a manifesto that reflects what they said. I wouldn't go into a coalition conversation with a political party that I don't know what they stand for. It just doesn't make sense to me. So, firstly. Secondly, this is not how coalitions work in other places in the world. Everybody tries to maximize their advantage. And then once the election is done, you negotiate on the basis of what the priorities are. In an arrangement such as the multi-party charter, in countries where it exists before the election, that arrangement sits on the ballot as a combined arrangement. Here you've got a consensus position, but technically they're still contesting one another in the election. So what are voters choosing? Basically, you understand? So we felt that for us it would be a distraction in terms of what we're doing. Let's complete our internal process and not be sidetracked by the potential spoils of power when we're still telling people that we want to listen to what they say.
Absolutely. Let's go to a break. We're in conversation with the national leader of Rise Mzansi, Mr. Songezo Zibi. When we come back from the break, we're going to delve into the policies that are on offer from Rise Mzansi after their recent launch of their manifesto this past weekend. Stick with us.
(1994) was supposed to be about freedom and justice, but none of those things have been fully delivered. There is no freedom and no justice when there is so much inequality in our society. 1994 was supposed to end racism, but today we have more victims of systemic racism than we did in 1994. Because our so-called leaders are unable to think outside the colonial toolbox. 1994 was supposed to be about healing the wounds of our past, but today we sit with fresh wounds and scars caused by those who claim to be our liberators.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. Tonight we're in conversation with the national leader of Rise Mzansi, Mr. Songezo Zibi. Mr. Zibi, let's come on to the policy offerings, because this is the moment many voters have been waiting for. What policies will you be putting on the table to differentiate your offering from other parties? And I suppose it's important to have the debate about what the ANC will be offering in this election. Listening to the January 8th statement, they'll be saying, look, let's look at this 30-year span. Okay, the last 5 years, 10 years may have been a bit bumpy. But over the last 30 years, your lives have gotten better as South Africans. We've rolled out a massive housing program. We've electrified the country. And we've built a really sophisticated social safety net. And often we dismiss that because of the theatre of the day and the issues of the day. But one does wonder why the ANC retains so much support, and that message resonates with a certain group of the electorate. Why do you think that message is wrong?
No, that message is not wrong. It's just not accurate in terms of what you need to fight an election, right? Because somebody born 10 years ago, unfortunately, the 20 years before doesn't exist for them. People vote on the basis of their experience now. There are also certain things that have been delivered. It happens to be the ANC that has been in power over the last 30 years. But the things that the ANC has done, like social grants and so on, for instance, social entitlements,
Sure.
are actually the people's entitlements. Another political party that comes into power cannot withdraw them, at least we wouldn't, right? Because the people are entitled to those. In fact, we are advocating for an even more comprehensive and thoughtful social welfare state because of the circumstances that we have. And we believe that it's, of course, something you would brag about at the next election if you happen to ever be in government, right? But the point is, these are entitlements that belong to the people. But if you're not doing well in the moment, you can't brag about something that you did 15 years ago. Because the life experience is now, not 15 years ago.
President Ramaphosa is going to be the face of the ANC's election campaign unless something very drastic changes between now and the election. And the argument he's been making is that, look, the ship of state is very difficult to turn around. I'm working slowly but surely to turn that ship around. I won't win every battle, but I'll win enough battles over the long course to turn the ship around. Do you think that message, what do you find fault in with that message? And what could President Ramaphosa have done any differently given what he inherited and the difficulties of just the massive size of government in South Africa?
The problem that we have is a relationship between the ANC and the state, and that the problems that we see in the state are the problems of the ANC. And therefore it appears that the state reform has to happen at the pace at which the ANC is able to cure itself. And we are out of time in terms of the needs of the people. We can't wait for that. Simple example. If you want to dislodge the corrupt networks that are choking Eskom and Transnet and other SOCs, you cause problems in the ANC, right? The solution is we need to get the ANC out of power by somebody who is unencumbered to those corrupt interests that are ruining those institutions. You can't have it both ways. You can't clean up the state and have the ANC at the same time, unless you want to wait another 30 years.
And indeed, one of the key planks of your manifesto is around the area of leadership, of governance, and really cleaning up the state. You're talking about ending cadre deployment.
Yes.
And I wonder how you would see that ending, which forms of cadre deployment you think should end, and what you think the right balance is between, of course, having a certain political direction, but not allowing that political direction to go all the way down and all the way to the left and the right in the state. I heard a joke recently that even cleaners in government departments are on the right political side. Deployees. Why end cadre deployment, and how would you end cadre deployment, and where would you end cadre deployment?
So this goes together with professionalizing the civil service. The job of a professional civil service is to carry out the political priorities of those that are elected, whoever the government is, right? When you contaminate the civil service with political deployees, first, the civil service reflects the problems of the political party itself, which is the problem that we have. And secondly, in the event that you were to have another government, you have a de facto opposition within the government itself, because the people were put there by that political party. For the sustainability of the democracy itself, to build a new culture of governing, the deployment of people must remain at ministerial level, in the minister's office. The minister and cabinet give political instructions to the professional to carry out their political priorities. That's really what it means. It might mean, therefore, in this instance, a new government might have to remove those people who are there because of political appointments. They should never have been there to begin with. Those people must go and be replaced by the professional, many of whom are in the civil service but are frustrated by these de facto politicians who are among the the professional ranks.
So you're talking about DGs not necessarily having to be political appointments, HODs not necessarily having to be political
they shouldn't
appointments.
be. They must never be.
What happens, in a kind of purge of those political appointments where they might frustrate the process? They currently, are the incumbents with the power. And if there's a wholesale attempt to remove those political appointments, we might get blowback. What kind of timing are you seeing in terms of that process?
Sizwe, I think it is fair, firstly, to give people an opportunity who are employed as professionals to perform their role as professionals. And I think in our law, there's provision made for people who are not carrying out their professional responsibilities in terms of what is required. We can't have this situation where you need a professional public servant needs to be removed for the right reasons and it becomes a political issue. Those people need to go under those circumstances. And not everybody who's a director general cannot carry out their professional responsibilities. But there are people in the system, in particular at municipal level, who are sitting in the professional ranks who should never have been there. They don't know what they're doing. They frustrate the professionals. They take decisions for political reasons and they misallocate and waste resources, which is why we have this problem of poverty and lack of delivery that we have now.
Another within this suite of policies around leadership and governance is about reducing the size of cabinet, but you really leave it at that. And I wondered, when you say that you want to reduce the size of cabinet, what kind of ministries do you think should be eliminated? What is a good size of cabinet in your view? And when would you see that kind of move happening? Would that be a process over time? Or would that be something that you'd like to come in immediately and address?
So this is something that we're actually going to look at more detail, but for the sake of this conversation, I'll make just two examples. There are these ministries that have been created because we've got a particular crisis, and they need not have been created to begin with. Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Electricity, for instance. Ministry of Public Enterprises. We need to pick a struggle, right? I think the energy ministry and the energy department and the electricity department really can be one. You don't need those to be two, as an example. We need to think about whether the Australian model, where the trade department is also together with the foreign affairs department, does not work better, for instance. And you take economic and industrial policy planning and you put it in the treasury as a constitution actually says it needs to be, and so on. So it's that kind of reviewing of the structure of cabinet that you need to do to arrive at a cabinet that works optimally and aids faster delivery of what needs to be done to turn the country around. And
what in your mind would be an optimal size of cabinet, given that you do want to cut its size?
I think we can do in South Africa with about 15 ministries, generally speaking. I think some of the ministries that we have, such as the Ministry of Small Business, that should be a directorate, to be honest. It doesn't need to be a department. And the people that are heading that department actually have never started a small business to begin with. There is nothing they can offer in that portfolio when you can allocate a set of technocrats to make sure that we meet what the Department of Trade and Industry is supposed to be doing to begin with.
Are you calling for the end of deputy ministries? Would you keep deputy ministries within those ministries down to 15?
Well, deputy ministries need to depend on the size of the portfolio itself. I think we've had for a long time 2 deputy foreign ministers, for instance, and I think that was warranted. By the way, South Africa has the largest number of embassies in the world, next to the United States, and you have to ask yourself, what does that deliver for us? So a department like that, sure. Department of Sports, I'm not sure. Right? So it depends on the size of the portfolio, and I think, but as a principle, no deputy ministers unless it is necessary.
Just before we go to another break, I was interested by some of the proposals around the criminal justice system, but also the judiciary.
Yes.
And you call for special courts, but it's not clear which special courts you're calling for. And we have labor courts.
Yeah.
We have land claims courts. We
Yeah.
have competition courts.
Yes.
We have electoral courts. We have tax courts. So, I mean, which more special courts are you looking for, and why do you think adding even more courts rather than making our current courts function more optimally is the right way to go?
So we've, around the criminal justice system, we've spoken about focusing on prevention, focusing on pre-conviction rehabilitation, and so on. Now, in the commercial sense, you've got something called the small claims court,
Yeah.
right? You can have a very effective system of restorative and rehabilitative justice where, particularly for juveniles, that currently we put in the adult court system, as it were, right? We end up with a criminal record at 21, never to find a job for the rest of their lives. And then we say, we also want to end youth unemployment. They are just things that get put through the court system that, in our view, if you take account of the circumstances in the country and why people commit crime, you can handle them in a different way so that in the long term, you still build a constructive and thriving citizen.
Absolutely. Let's go to a break. We're in conversation with the national leader of Rise Mzansi, Mr. Songezo Zibi. We've discussed some of their policy proposals around the state, capable governance and ethical governance. And after the break, we'll come back on the debate about Rise Mzansi's economic policies and whether they'll take South Africa forward or not. Stick with us.
Poverty is a violation of people's rights. Hunger is violent. Neglect is violent. Violent crime is traumatizing. 1994 was a crossroads in South Africa's history. We are at another crossroads now. If we do not change course, we will become another failed African state whose citizens are poor, even though our country has natural resources and natural wealth. Unemployment is higher now than it was 20 years ago. Violent crime is worse now than it was 20 years ago. Corruption is not just worse, it is the very reason our so-called leaders are even in politics today. They even kill one another for the chance to steal from us and destroy our lives. Many South Africans do not trust the police anymore. We do not trust government officials. Too many people in our society tolerate and defend corrupt people.
Mr. Zibi, the economy has been stuck in stagnancy mode for longer than anyone can remember. I think the good times, to the extent that there were good times, are long in the rearview mirror. You faced some criticism after the launch of the manifesto about the economic side of things. Economist Duma Kubule on X recently said that the manifesto was quite shocking because it only mentioned unemployment once. To be fair, it does deal with questions of jobs, and the word unemployment is only mentioned once. But how do you deal with that criticism?
So what we've tried to do is to approach it from two angles. One, why the economy is not growing. Two, why are people not able to find jobs? The two don't always match, and I'll explain why. So the reasons for the stagnant economy, the main ones is Eskom and Transnet. It really is true. There's about 2 to 3 percentage points between them, because you can't grow an economy without electricity and so on. So we've really got to fix those, right? So we've said that. The third reason is violent crime. I come from Mkanduli, and Mthatha is nearby. You don't want to open even a spaza shop in Mthatha. You are going to get shot. Business people get murdered on a regular basis. Now, when we talk about investor confidence, we always think about some billionaires and so on. An investor is a person who wants to put their savings into opening a commercial opportunity, even if it's a spaza shop. People are afraid to do that. When they do, they get robbed. So there are things like that that are really basic that we must solve. But we can't just do that, though. We also have to ask ourselves why 90% of the unemployed either have matric or no matric at all. If we don't solve that problem, then even when we start growing the economy, we're going to make the inequality worse, because we have so much inequality because there are millions who can't actually earn an income because they don't have the skills. So you have to solve both of these things in order to do that. We talk about investing again, especially in regional and municipal infrastructure. That's an opportunity to employ people. Right? We talk about putting piped water in every home in South Africa, even in the villages. Then people can be plumbers and these kind of things. I think people tend to look for a specific number of jobs that you say you're going to create. What we've gone for is listing a set of things that you can do in order to create opportunities for work and train people to be able to take advantage of those opportunities for work.
You spoke about the importance of Eskom and Transnet and really zeroing in on those two. I suppose if there is a criticism of the manifesto, it's that you've kept things relatively vague. Now, to be fair, I mean, do people want to read, a long treatise of biblical length, or do they want to know your general direction? But on Eskom and Transnet, when we come to the manifesto, you've got some proposals about unlocking green funding.
Yeah.
Of course, throughout the manifesto, you place large emphasis on putting the right people in the right places.
Yes,
and sure, those are the quick wins.
Yeah.
But from a policy perspective, when we come to Eskom, one of the key questions right now is, should Eskom be unbundled? Is the unbundling the right strategy? And should it be proceeded with more pace, more vigor? Or is this, in fact, the wrong move? And along with the unbundling is the question of who owns an unbundled entity, because it could be unbundled and state-owned, or it could be still, rebundled and privatized. This is a key question of our time policy-wise. What do you think should happen in terms of the ownership structure of Eskom?
So the unbundling is not a problem. You can unbundle and it remains state-owned. Right, so the unbundling is really not the issue. People focus too much on that. The question is, where does the money that you need come from? So let's use some actual numbers. For generation, you have got a debt of about 400 billion alone. 350 billion plus is guaranteed by the government. The government has taken over some of that, but you make these choices where you're saying, okay, we're going to put this money into Eskom, and people are going to die of hunger, and we're going to look away. Right? That borrowing is mostly from pension funds, right, which is the savings of South African workers. We are paying up to 11% interest on that debt. Now, what if we were to say, instead of borrowing from the pension funds, we say the same pension funds must become investors in Eskom, and the worker savings or pension funds get paid when Eskom is making a profit, right? It's how you do the part ownership. The transmission business needs 450 billion. We don't have it. Now we can say, because we don't want pension funds and the like to be invested in that part of the business, again, we're going to borrow at 11, 12%, and more people go hungry every day. This is about choices of where you get the money, where does that money go. Our choice as Rise Mzansi is stop borrowing from pension funds, ask the workers to get involved in the investment in those state-owned enterprises, use the savings to put food on the table for real people who are killing themselves and their kids right now because they are too hungry.
Sure, and I think various countries have models where direct worker ownership, especially in state-owned enterprises, has materialized. I think of Germany as one example. The danger there would be, with the precarious financial position of Eskom, if workers become investors and still nothing turns around, then now you've got to you probably have the mother of all protest action, but also very impoverished workers after that. How do we protect those funds as well, though?
So putting the right people in those organizations is part of the solution. Cleaning up those inflated contracts that get paid at Eskom and Transnet and municipalities is part of the solution, right? So you can't just do one thing. There was a proposal from COSATU, and I had a conversation with them. This was before I got into politics, to use PIC money. I said there's nothing called PIC money. That's civil servants' money. That's our parents' savings. You can't just use it as if it's tax money. It's not. If you're going to ask civil servants to put their savings in Eskom, then they need to have a say in what happens over there. Right? That's all we're saying, that we need to explore new models of sourcing capital that are still transparent, but solve the problem in the short and the long term.
Absolutely. And, you know, another interesting aspect of the direction you're going in is you're very clear that race and gender need to be explicitly mentioned in policy, not to sideline anyone, but to identify where the historical injustice in our country is.
Yes.
Again, in terms of more detail on that, do you support broad-based black economic empowerment legislation as it currently stands? Would you try to amend that legislation? Do you think affirmative action as one of the planks of that in the workplace, in universities, should remain? Do you think that there's a different route? What concretely, as far as the proposals on economic justice, would be different from where we are now?
So black economic empowerment as a concept should stay. But I also think we need to take account of other realities in our society more intentionally, like people with disabilities and so on, right? We need to take account of gender disparities, because in that, there's also like a multiracial element, even income inequality within the workplace where women get paid less. So the concept of affirmative action is important to build a diverse society, and we support it. Here is a problem, though, Sizu. What we've done is we have not put instruments in place to make sure that people have a meaningful opportunity to build enterprises that are thriving, that are 100% black owned, right? And that is why we're saying somebody spending 14 billion to buy 5% of a white owned company is not transformation to me. But assisting with patient finance an innovative black or woman owned company to eventually become a discovery, that's black economic empowerment, where those companies get listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and in New York and all of these places. We need to be intentional about it. Our gripe is we still need to get a piece of the same sized pie. No, the growth element of the economy needs to be black. It needs to be woman-led and so on. That's why we talk about potentially getting between 100 and 200 billion rand in 5 years to finance those kind of enterprises, or give them access to the patient capital that they need to become big players in the economy.
Let's go to a break, and we'll come back with some questions about the internal health of Rise Mzansi as a party, and whether it will be able and fit to contest on the ballot in the 2024 elections. We're in conversation with Songezo Zibi, who's the national leader of Rise Mzansi. Fresh from their manifesto launch, we've been quizzing him on various events in South African politics, their manifesto, particularly the first plank on leadership and a capable state, the other plank on the economy and jobs and growing the economy. Let's come back after the break and see whether Rise Mzansi itself is internally fit for an important fight. Stick with us. Welcome back to Unfiltered. This evening we're in conversation with the national leader of Rise Mzansi, Mr. Songezo Zibi. They have just launched their manifesto, as you may have seen, and tonight we've been asking them questions about that manifesto, trying to flesh out and quizzing Mr. Zibi on it. But of course, now that we've touched on some aspects of the manifesto, Rise Mzansi as an organization, of course, itself is contesting for this election, and ultimately the health of Rise Mzansi will determine whether you can implement those aspects of your manifesto. I suppose we can start with the funding question, which I asked you, which I asked you last time. The disclosure of funding and the transparency of that funding has been has circled. Clouded is maybe a strong word. Rise Mzansi. Are you able to disclose that now?
Yeah, so I'm able to give an update on what's happening. So we registered at the end of September. And the reason our registration was delayed is because there was an objection against our registration. So that took time. We have now submitted our list of donors to the IEC, and I think that will come out at the end of February, where anybody who has donated over 100,000 rand or more will be published. We have several hundred donors at the moment. And they fall into three categories. One is our own supporters and members and volunteers who use their own money to do the work of the organization. That saves us a lot of money. That actually potentially runs into millions. Professional services, for instance, we hardly pay for them. People are lawyers and this kind of thing tend to do the work that they can do, websites, etc. The second, we tapped into the professional circles that we all have for people to make recurring donations, usually up to about 50, 60,000 rand for some people, depending on what they can afford and that kind of thing. That's the largest volume of the financial donations. And then there is a smaller number of people who are able to afford 100,000 rand and above. And those will come out in February.
Okay, so you're committing that end of Feb.
Oh yeah,
we will have that information.
In fact, we'll issue a statement before the IEC publishes anyway. Oh yeah, no, we'll do that.
Very good, very well. We look forward to that. I think you said it was going to be 3 months last time. So
yes, there was an objection to our registration. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, of course, Julius Malema has now started using this as a rod for your back, and I think various political parties have pounced on this issue.
Yes.
Are you worried that this is becoming something that people are using against Rise Mzansi to paint a negative picture of transparency?
No, it's more of an irritation sometimes, Sizwe, because we've made certain choices. So there are certain things we haven't spent money on because we can't afford that kind of scale. We decided that our major expense is going to be posters and T-shirts. Why? Because we are a new organization. People can't vote for you if they don't know you, they have not seen you. So we don't do big events. We don't do events in stadia. We have to bus thousands of people because we can't afford it, because we don't have that kind of money. So we took a deliberate decision that only once last year at voter registration time, and only once or twice this year, we will invest significantly in posters, because that puts us every day in people's faces right across the country. It's when they noticed the posters that they got shaken and assumed it's money. But people are laughing at us for not holding big events and saying we're a spaza shop. The parties that hold events in stadia, they spend, millions more than we do on anything really.
I guess one other question is this threshold of signatures on the ballot.
Yeah.
I noticed that the party was very keen to get everyone who was at your manifesto launch to make sure that they sign. How many signatures do you actually need? And how far are you in terms of, because that deadline is creeping up on us?
I mean, this thing is one of those things that we, if we had the resources, we'd actually go and challenge that thing in court anyway, because we think it's arbitrary, basically, for new parties. I think the number is about 45,000 signatures that you've got to get. We will get there by the end of this month.
Right.
So it's not a biggie for us. It's distracting to our organizing model, though. Because instead of spending time telling people about our manifesto, you now have to carry around a separate form and ask people to register you for the IEC. So it's a distraction more than anything, and it's arbitrary.
How close are you? Do you think that you will, how close are you to the 45,000 so far?
Oh no, Sizwe, we've got close to 300,000 supporters in our universe. it's just the amount of work it takes for our organizers to now go back to those same people and say, sign a new form.
Yeah.
This is what it's about, right? That's why I'm saying by the end of this month, that process will be done and we'll make the submission.
Interesting. Why do you think it should be challenged at the
The
IEC?
number, the volume,
Sure.
because it's not the same number for everyone.
Right.
The established political parties is 1,000. So what makes COPE qualify for 1,000 when it literally doesn't exist? And Rise Mzansi must get tens of thousands of signatures. There is no logic behind
Sure.
it.
Well, I mean, I suppose the logic is the barrier to entry because we don't want anyone to be able to start a political party. But your point is that the number is...
The number is arbitrary. Yeah, the number is
Do
arbitrary.
you think it's excessive as well? Or-
Yeah, I think it is excessive. I think anybody who's just a chancer who's not serious about what they're doing, I think, for instance, 10,000 might be sufficient enough. They've based it on what it takes to earn a seat in the last election. You know, that kind of formula that they've used. But I think it's arbitrary.
I mean, you have 300,000 in your universe, you got a big turnout, but this could really affect some of the new parties. I mean, 45,000 signatures is no mean feat.
No, it's not easy. I mean, it took us months to get to 45,000 supporters, right? So I know how difficult it is. Because we've got an infrastructure now that's able to put up posters and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's not something that we worry about, particularly. There are people in the organization that are dealing with that.
Yeah.
But I'd imagine for a new organization that doesn't have the kind of footprint that we have, it's going to be difficult. And I'm not sure that's fair. To do that, because there are other barriers such as the deposit that you have to pay to the IEC and that sort of thing. You can use those in combination to determine who's serious and who's not.
You had an interesting way of selecting your candidates for Parliament. Talk us through the thinking about how the party is coming to innovative new ways of doing things, not using the political deployment method, and why you arrived at that decision. And do you have any insight into the selection? I know you promised it very soon, next month, I think. Any interesting candidates on the way that you'd like to share with us tonight?
No, I can share some characteristics. Let me explain why we did it. We decided that we're going to establish a culture where we reach out to society for some of the best people that we can find. In fact, we talk to our people about the concept of recruiting upwards. Go to someone that you've always felt, if that person was in Parliament, I would feel better about politics. Go to them and recruit them and ask them to put up their hand and go to Parliament. Your position in the organization does not automatically mean that you are going to have a certain position in terms of our election list. Capability matters.
Sure.
We have to walk the talk, right? So that's one thing. But we've got particularly young people. We've got experience either in the NGO space, in the public service, in the private sector, in the community work, and so on. And a lot of them actually really highly educated. There are people with PhDs, master's degrees, and so on. There are also senior people that have put up their hands as well. We've got a lot of experience in leadership and so on. So we've got a good mix of people.
Let's go to some comments on social media, and then we'll allow you some final thoughts as we conclude our conversation. But I believe that we have some reactions from X. We have Sizwe Luvuno, who says, reducing the cabinet and professionalizing the civil service is also a DA policy. This is dangerous because it will eventually lead to a reduced workforce in government and basic services won't be met. The economy will implode. I think we might have one more. And that's from Shokhwa, who says, what is their point of view in terms of the land issue? So those are just some comments from social media and anything that you'd like to wrap up the conversation with as well.
Let me deal with the issue of land because I think it's important. And that is, there are two things we haven't done well. It's spatial planning and therefore allocation and distribution of land in that context, including expropriating it, to make it available even to people who cannot afford to buy it. What we believe is just get the spatial planning correct for urban, peri-urban and rural communities, and then move on to land securing land either through expropriation or using state land, and then distributing it to people, taking account of population growth and urbanization.
With compensation, without, or some mix of the two?
No, with compensation where it is necessary, because people always assume a white landowner. But I come from the Transkei, the former Transkei. You are not going to expropriate anybody's land there and not pay them. There will be a war. So we need to accept the concept of making laws for general application, right, so that they don't get abused. Expropriation means I don't pay you the price that you think you should get for this land.
Mr. Zibi, thank you very much for joining us on Unfiltered, and we hope that we'll be third time lucky and have you back on the show sometime in the future.
I look forward to it.
It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much for joining us on Unfiltered tonight. We've inquired into the policy offerings of Rise Mzansi. We began by asking their national leader about his reaction to various political developments, the rise of new parties, the ANC's manifesto launch, and then we delved into some manifesto promises about governance, about a more capable and ethical state, and about the economy, where they have been quizzed and challenged by various observers. And then we've ended on the internal health of Rise Mzansi. If you have any other burning questions, let's take this conversation over to social media on X at Unfiltered SABC. And thank you for joining us for yet another installment of Unfiltered News, Unfiltered Views, and Unfiltered Conversations. Have a good night.